What is up, everybody? Welcome back to my advanced programming course using C++. Today we're going to talk about arrays as function arguments. We're going to go back to the program that we were doing before where we read in the employee amounts and the pay and the rate, and we're going to actually convert some stuff to functions. We're going to split it up a little bit. So let's take a look at the code. So in order to show you how arrays are passed by reference, first we're actually going to do a little bit of an exercise. First we're going to split this out into functions. So if you remember this program, we read in employee name, employee ID, and then the employee hours, and we used parallel arrays, processed their contents, computed and all that. But the problem here is that it is in one main function. So what we want to do is perhaps we want to split the computation, the input into its own function. So what I'll do is I'm going to write a function called read data, and I'm going to have three arguments for this function. I'm going to have an int, which represents an array. I'm also going to have a string, which represents an array, and then another string, which also represents an array. So do that. Okay. So now I have my function prototype, and what I want to do is I want to take lines 14 through 22, 14 through 22, and split them out to my function that I have over here, which is read data. Okay, so let's do that real quick in terms of defining the function. Okay, let's so we're going to take the prototype. We'll define it. I know we have a lot of commented out code. Let's clean this up a bit. I did show you the range-based loop. If you haven't seen that already, go check out my video on that. So now I have that. I'm going to name my variables. These are array variables. So we're going to have parameter array variables. And we can just call this our data. We can call this name data, right? And then ID data. And what we want to do is we want to pass in this and populate it at the same time. Now, if you remember what I told you before, all arrays, well, a couple lectures before, all arrays are passed by reference, which means that whenever I pass in an array to a function, we're actually going to pass the array parameter as reference, not as value. The difference is if you pass something by value, you're making a copy of it. When you pass something as a reference, you're actually passing in the address of that variable. With arrays, you don't have to put an ampersand. It's automatically assumed that all arrays are passed by reference because you don't want the compiler to make a copy of your large array and then pass it down to your function. Would not be efficient. Now, let's take this block of code and then put it down here. Okay, and then we're just going to change the names here a bit. Do that. Do this. And that's it, right? Now, the other thing is obviously we have to call the function, right? If we don't call the function, then the data is not going to get populated. So if we call the function, all we have to do is we say read data. We're going to pass in the hours, then the names, and then the ID. And this is a void function, so we're not really going to return anything back. So the void function is just going to perform its reading, doing a cin, populating the array, and then coming out. Now, once I do this, this should really not change. It should prompt me the same way, and then I should get the same results that I've gotten before. So let's test it out real quick. So I'm going to say John 101, put 20, Steve 102, 30, Jim 103, 40, Liz 104, 38, and Lucy 105, and we'll say she worked 40 hours. Okay. So before I press enter to get this through, notice that now I'm in this loop here. Okay. And we're just populating the array. Now, when the function gets called back, meaning it returns from the call on line 15, we should pretty much get a calculated result based on the second piece of code, which is this for loop here, which does the calculations for the pay. So let's do that. Excellent. So by me calling the array, passing in the array, I didn't have to pass in an ampersand because, like I said, all arrays are passed by reference. And I'm going to show you now what the hell does that actually mean. I know you're going to pass in the memory variable there, but what does it actually mean to pass by reference in terms of arrays, right? So you remember I told you that for every array there is a starting address. So let's take a look, and we'll use one example of one of the arrays. Okay, so when I declare hours, right? So let's say this is hours. I have 5 elements, and I have the data in here, 20, 30, 40, 38, and 40. When I declared it in the main function, what I actually have is I'm going to have something called an address. So suppose that this is going to start at address 007CH. Okay, that's a hexadecimal address. We start at address 007CH in terms of the array. That's the starting address here. So this is the starting address. So the next one, not CH, but CF. H doesn't exist in hex. CF. So one more than CF would be this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one. So you would add on 1. So plus 1 would be over here, and then this plus 1 in terms of addresses, right? So the next one would be whatever is after the next, so it would be D0. Okay, and then X007, D1. Okay, I'm just adding 1 to the hexadecimal value. After C comes D, F is the last one, so okay, and then 007 D2. So D0 would actually represent the first element, D1 would represent the second element, and so on. Right? That's what I'm saying, plus 1, plus 1. Now, when I pass the hours array into my read data function, so let's take a look. So here's my read data function. Okay, let's go back. So I'm copying this, I'm passing it in here. Okay, erase this. What's actually happening when you call the function and you pass in your hours array, Okay, and it's going to happen with names and ID. I'm just using hours array as an isolated case in the isolated array. Is you're actually going to pass in the starting address and assign it to hours. Okay, and then when it goes in, the address of that doesn't change, which means that you're still referencing the original hours address. And I'm going to show you that right now. So how do I know that? Let's go back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to print out the address of hours. Okay, so we'll do something like this. And then we can say that. Okay, so let's look at the original address. I'm going to comment the rest of this out. Okay, and I'm not going to go through reading the data in yet. Oh, at all, because we really don't need to do that right now. So let's comment that out. I'm going to run that. Okay, so you see this funny looking number here? Okay, that is the address, the starting address of hours. So you can copy this. We can take a look. It's basically where what this is. Okay, so that this starting address really is this right here. That's the starting address. So that the next address would be this thing plus 1, which would be B1, right? So we take, so this over here would be X7FFC 37ECA EB1. Then this over here would be B2, but same thing, X7FFC 37ECAE, and so on. Okay, now that's the starting address we have in main, and so you understand what's actually happening, I'm going to stop this. When I print out the address inside the read data function, they should be equal because we're actually pointing to the address of the original hours. So what I'm going to do is before I even read the data, I'm going to do this, but instead of hours, obviously, is the names don't matter. The names is just a variable name. We'll just say our data because that's what we're printing out. I mean, that's what we're reading in, right? That's what the input for this function is. And you're going to see that it doesn't matter what the name is. It really is all about the address. So if I do address, we'll write main. And then here we'll write read data. Let's check it out. Let's see. Let's see if this is going to do what I intend for it to do. There we go. So what happened here? So the main address is this, right? And then inside the read data function, our data, which got passed in, right? Same address, right? If they both start at the same address, that means as I populate it, it's going to edit the array that I got from main because it's the same address. And that's basically what pass by reference means, is you're actually passing in the address of the variable. Who cares about the name? As long as the address is equal, then when you pass by reference, it's definitely going to modify the data. This is a good way to look at the way you pass by value and pass by reference. If I did the same thing, and I'll leave that exercise up to you, and I passed in a variable, so not an array, but just a variable, and I used the pass by value method, you're going to see that the address is not going to be the same because it's passed by value, which means that when you pass by value, the actual address, starting addresses are going to change. Okay. Now remember, in an array, you have a starting address, and then each element is going to be this plus 1, right? In a variable, you can't do plus 1 of this address. It just really starts at this address and ends at that, well, depending on how many bytes it is. Okay. So that's basically what pass by reference, pass by value means. Is the address pass by reference is not going to change. If you pass by value and you try and print out the addresses, they are going to change. And if they do change, then that means that the modification inside your function will not be permanent. It's only going to be temporary within your function. But then when you return it back in the main, the data is going to get lost if you would try to modify it. Whereas if you pass by reference, if you modify data within your function, as we're doing here, it's going to be permanent. Okay, and going back to the function call. Okay, so I hope you understood what it means to pass arrays around by into functions. Okay, and remember that all arrays, you can't pass an array by value. All arrays are passed by reference, so you don't have to put in the ampersand. Okay? Okay, so I'll see you on the next video. We'll talk a little bit more about arrays, because there may be times when you don't want to modify data on an array. Because remember, an array is always passed by reference. But sometimes you may just want to pass it in, and you don't want your function to modify it. And there's a way to do that. So I'll see you on the next lecture.